everyone, welcome to another video. Today I want to share with you another $6 and under stamp set video. This time I'm going to be featuring a Michaels $2 embossing folder, and the stamp comes with it as well. Here's a look at that embossing folder. Now, like I said, this is from Michaels. This is one of their Craft Smart brands. It retails for $2 and you get the embossing folder and you get this stamp. They've got a few different kinds. I got the gem one, and then there was the little snow cone one that you've seen, and then also there is a cactus one, I believe, and there may be different ones at different locations. This is just what was available in my area. Now, these are in the center aisle of the store, so I believe they are seasonal. So if you want it, you're probably going to have to get it pretty quickly or it will be gone. Now, this is a smaller embossing folder. It's about the same size as you would get in a store, not your normal 6x6 that you can kind of order online. It measures about 4 inches by 5.5 inches long. I'm going to be using this on a panel that measures 4 by 5.25 inch, so it's going to fit my panel perfectly. Now, this embossing folder is thick, sturdy plastic. It's got one side with the indentions, the other side with the raised portion. You get a really nice embossing effect, almost too good, and I'll show you how you need to kind of play around with this one to get the right amount of pressure with your machine. The first thing I want to do, though, is I actually want to create some masks with my embossing folder. This has different gems on it. It has 4 different kinds of them. So what I'm doing is I'm going to stamp these out onto Post-it notes. I've got some black dye ink. I just rub the pad over the raised portion of the embossing folder. Then I flip it over onto a Post-it note while the ink is still wet. If you need to get it a little wetter, you could huff on it with your breath or give it a very light mist of water. Then you just press down on your Post-it note. So I started off with the square. I'm doing these right in the middle of my Post-it note. I want as much area around it as I can. Now, this doesn't take much pressure, but if you have some kind of issue where you can't give this enough pressure to get this stamp down onto the Post-it note, because this embossing folder does not have any give, you get a little bit of give with your Post-it notepad. But if you need a little bit more pressure than what your hands are able to give you, you can grab your brayer, and it's just a little like rolling pin basically. You could even use that if you have one of those on hand, and just give it a press with that, and that will get your ink onto your Post-it note as well. Now, you don't have to use a black dye ink if you're worried about this staining. It came off very easily for me. All I did was I went ahead and I took it to my bathroom right as soon as I was done doing this. I took just some hand soap, a foaming hand soap, squirted some on there, and I used warm water and a toothbrush that I actually use for like my nails and things to clean them out. If I've got some whatever Play-Doh, a lot gets stuck under there, different things like that. I use a toothbrush to get that out, and I use that on my embossing folder, and it took all of the ink off. You just want to give it a good dry before you bring it back to your craft room and start doing some other things with it. Now, once I had my embossing folder cleaned off, all of my little images stamped onto my Post-it note, it was time to cut these out. I am using a craft knife. These are a very cheap but essential tool for your craft room. There really is no substitute for this tool. If you need one, you need one, and you know what I mean when I say that. But I am using this just to cut out each little gemstone that I stamped in the middle of my paper. Now, this takes a little bit of time, but the beauty about this design is it does not have to be perfect. I'm doing this very quickly. I'm not going into great detail to make sure I get every little single nook and cranny right up against the line or anything like that. I just want the general shape. So it takes very little time, and it also takes very little pressure. Because these little Post-it notes are so thin, even if you miss a little spot, when you do that on cardstock, you can't kind of rip it away, but on these Post-it notes, you can just give it a little pull and it'll come loose. So I did that first teardrop shaped gem, and then I'll just go through and do the remaining gems that I have lined up over on the left-hand side. Now, I don't cut on my craft mat, but I do have a very small cutting mat that I just pull out very quickly and cut on it. You could also use a glass mat, whatever you have on hand. You just don't want to damage your work surface when you're using a craft knife like this. Just have something underneath there to protect your work surface. I did that little shape there, and finally I'm going to finish off with this very easy and quick square. All you have to do on this is go along the 4 edges, pop out the center, and you're good to go. Now you can save the centers if you want to. Myself, these weren't sticky at all because I did that on the non-sticky portion, so I just tossed them. I can always go back and make more of these very quickly if I need to. Now it's on to the embossing part. Now with a normal embossing folder with cardstock, in my machine, what I like to do is I put my multi-purpose platform down with no tabs on it. I believe some people use 1 tab. Mine has quite a bit of pressure. I've had mine for about 10 years now, and it still has a great amount of pressure. So I do no tabs with my multi-purpose platform, a cutting plate, then I have my embossing folder with my cardstock in it, and another cutting plate on top of that, and I can run that through. That is with a normal embossing folder that I use any other time. This one, way too much pressure. You can see here it ripped the little gems just in certain spots, and some other spots it was okay, but mostly along the top there, it just did not work out. So I did a little playing around. You might have to do that too with this. This is a cheap embossing folder. It's $2. You can't really beat that anywhere else. So I didn't mind spending 3 extra minutes figuring this out. What worked for me was my multi-purpose platform with both tabs down, 2 pieces or 3 pieces of felt, then my little embossing folder with the cardstock, and 1 cutting plate on top. That was my sandwich. That's what worked for me. You need to do experimenting to see what will work for you in your particular machine. And you may have a big kick, and this sandwich may not work for you because the pressure can be different for each and every machine. So spend that little extra time playing around, adjusting your settings, and then you'll get this beautiful embossed panel like I have here. And I have to say, this turned out beautifully once I figured out the right sandwich. And I haven't played around with my little ice cream cone one yet, so I'm not sure if that will work on that one either. All right, moving on now to the fun part of coloring these in. I'm using my Distress inks. You can use whatever sort of dye ink. You could even use pigment ink here. I just want some color on these to really bring them to life. So I have my 4 colors here. I am using Squeeze Lemonade. I've got some Worn Lipstick, Cracked Pistachio, and Dusty Concord. I'm starting off with the Cracked Pistachio, and I'm going in and coloring in all of those little rectangle gems. I'm using that mask that I made that I cut out with my craft knife on the Post-it note. And when I do this, I'm using my mini ink blending tool. You can use a finger dauber, you can use a makeup sponge, you can use one of your little stencil brushes, whatever you want to use to get the color on. But whenever you do this over the embossed part, those embossed edges are going to get a darker color, while the inside of the gem that's pressed down will contain that lighter color, and it's just a really pretty effect. It almost looks like you've spent time coloring and shading on this, but it takes like 2 seconds to get color on it. It is wonderful to color these in this way. Also, because I didn't spend time really going in and fussy cutting these, making sure everything was perfect, it has a more artistic look instead of perfect, which I like, because inevitably when I'm doing a large background like this, I'm going to mess up on the placement at least once. If you're doing a perfect background and you mess up on the placement, it's going to throw the whole thing off. So going about it this way and making, not making sure everything's just perfect, whenever I put a placement down that's just a little bit off, it looks like it was intended to be that way. So I did the teardrop shaped gems with the Dusty Concord. Because that was such a strong color, I wanted to keep it to the gem that had the least amount on my panel. Then I moved on to Worn Lipstick for those larger gems. And finally, I'm going to do the Squeeze Lemonade on those smaller, almost circular type of gems that are on this panel. Now for this one, I didn't remember which way it was supposed to go, and these aren't really perfect gems. I mean, they're a little, not each side is perfect and the same. So whenever you go and put these on too, that kind of helps with the imperfect look in case you don't remember which way these went on whenever you cut them out, if that makes any sense the way I'm saying it. Now once I had all of them colored in, I went back and filled in the edges where I missed a few with some Dusty Concord, and then once that was finished, that finished off the panel. It was that easy to color in and really add those pops of color and make those gems stand out on the background. Now you don't have to do it with this embossing folder. This is a great technique for any one you may have on hand that has these really singular images in it. There's a closer look at that effect. You get the really dark edges with the raised embossing parts of it, but then where it's pushed back into the paper, you retain those really light portions. And again, you don't have to use the mini ink blending tool. Use whatever you have on hand to make it work. So with my panel done, it was time to move on to finishing off this card. I had put my effort into that panel, so I wanted to cover as little of it as possible, but I did want to use this stamp. Now, this is, again, a very cheap stamp. It's not going to work the best, but there are a few things you can do to make it work well for you. What I like to do is I start off with an eraser. I go over the entire thing, really rubbing against that to get any residue left on the stamp off. Then I clean it off very well, and then I come in with this sanding block. Now this is a nail sanding block. You can get these at Sally's, wherever you can get nail supplies, you can get one of these. It has different grits on different sides. Use the side with the finest grit, lightly go over the entire stamp, and then clean off any residue. Make sure you get all of those little dust particles off so they don't get in the way of your stamping. Now that is going to allow the ink to adhere a little better. I have a full video on prepping your stamps. I'll leave that link in the top right hand corner. It goes into a lot more depth about different ways to do this if you're not comfortable with the sanding block. But with a $2 stamp, it's not going to break the bank if you do ruin this stamp. Now once I had that completely prepped, I went ahead and made a die cut with a circle die cut with some white cardstock. I'm going to stamp this stamp right down onto it. I am using an acrylic block. If you don't want to prep your stamp, you can use a stamp positioner and stamp this multiple times. That's going to give you a really nice inking and a really nice stamped image as well. But I wanted to use an acrylic block. And one thing I do like to do is ink it up and stamp it off a few times. That's also going to help prep your stamp and get it ready to go onto the paper for real. Now I cleaned off any little residue that was on there from wiping it off beforehand, and I'll ink this up again. I'm using Versified Onyx Black ink. This is a pigment ink. It sticks to these stamps very well, and it gives me a really good image no matter what stamp I'm using. That's why I'm using this. Sometimes when you use a dye ink on these type of stamps, it can ball up and it gives you a really splotchy image. This gives me a good image no matter what. So I'm pressing this down right onto my paper. I like to give it a minute to let the ink kind of get into the paper, if you will, and then I pulled it off, and there it is. It's a very nice stamped image. I was impressed myself. I didn't think it would stamp that good. I thought I was going to have to pull out my Misty, but I gave it a shot, and it worked out really well. Now, to put that You Rock on, that is from a different stamp set. If you don't have a sentiment that you think is going to go with this, you can use anything. You can use hello, you can use you're gorgeous, you can use whatever you want. A thank you is very appropriate for this kind of card, happy birthday, whatever you want. I just happen to have the You Rock stamp set or sentiment, so I stamped that down. You can also type out a sentiment on your computer, print it off, and cut it out just like I have it here, and you won't even be able to tell the difference. But I did mount those in the bottom left-hand corner of my card. I cut off the extra that was hanging off the edge, and I added some banners to that You Rock sentiment just to kind of pull it away from the white on white. Now, to kind of spice this up a little bit, add a little bit of embellishment, I used some liquid pearls, I believe is what it's called. They're from Ranger. And these are just a very pearly drop, kind of like the Nouveau accents. You can use those if you have those on hand. I just put quite a few of these. I messed up on one of them. I just used my little scraper tool to scrape it off and go right back in. Nobody will know that you even messed up. But that completely finished off the outside of the card. Once I got all those little pearls on there, I did do some work on the inside with that same stamp from Michaels. I just inked it up with some distress inks that I used on the outside and kept turning it to get all those different colors around the outside edge, just with some selective inking. I added the thanks above that stamp. That is from the same stamp set as the You Rock, which is from Paper Smooches. But again, use whatever you have on hand. If you don't have a sentiment stamp set, print it off from your computer. There are tons of free fonts out there that you can download, make your own sentiments, print them off, and cut them out with your paper trimmer. So don't think just because you don't have a few of these products or you don't have this sentiment set or whatever that you can't make this card. There's always a go around for whatever card you are making. If you have any questions, you can always leave them down below, and I'd be happy to give other options or answers. I want to thank you guys so much for watching today. There are a few links on the left side of your screen you can click on if you want to see some more videos from me. Happy crafting, everyone.